Hello everybody! Welcome to another video from CodeSource with Profanis. Angular 17 is a great feature and it has also released the new control flow. In that control flow we have also the defer block, and this is what in this video we're going to talk about. So without any further delay, let's get started. I have prepared this small application where we have just two fields, and here we can see that we have this autocomplete based on material, and we can select our favorite Angular version, either being 2, 4, 5, or whatever up to 17, and then we have just to select what is the day that we started working with Angular. So let's say that now I'm going to be like my favorite Angular version is 17. So if we select that, we can see that we have this kind of, let's say, survey, and it says how much do you like Angular 17 features. Let's say that I really like the logo, I really like the documentation, I really like the control flow if block, the for block, the switch block, and of course the defer block, and I really like also the automatic migration to the new built-in control flow. And this is the amazing logo that we currently have. So this is what the application looks like, and let's see what is happening behind the scenes. I will go here to VS Code, and what you can see is just into the app component HTML I have just a router outlet. And if I now go to my routes, what you can see is that we have the component, main component. And the main component, if I go there, we have just the Angular survey. And the Angular survey, here we have this condition. If the Angular version is 17, then I'm going to have this Angular 17 features component. Nice. So let's do the following. Let's open this guy, and what we can see is that the main.js is 17.6K. What we will try is we will try to improve the performance and decrease the bundle size. And of course, as of today, how can we decrease the bundle size? We can go into the routes, and instead of eagerly loading the main, I would like to lazy load that main component. So I will do this thing. Automatically, as you can see, the main.js now it is 2.24, and we have a new chunk into the main component, and this is 15.3. Nice. So let's go to the browser to see if everything works as expected. And it seems that it works just fine, and if we open the developer tools, we expect not to have any error. And again, if we go to Angular 17, this is what we have. Nice. How can we decrease a bit more this kind of chunk, the main component? So we can do that by using the defer block. Before we see the code, let's go to the slides and see some of the theory part. To lazy load a component, what we can do is that we can use the defer block, and inside here we can then have our component, which is a great feature since it allows us in a very neat and easy way to lazy load a component without having programmatically to import the component and create that dynamically. But of course, sometimes just the defer block is not enough. We need to have, let's say, a condition, right? We need to know a condition when to display something. So for this reason, there is an imperative Boolean expression using the when keyword here. And what this is doing is that as soon as this Boolean expression is true, at that point of time, we will fetch and display this component. While waiting this component to be displayed, perhaps we need to have an information to the user so that we can increase the user experience, and this is the placeholder block. So the placeholder thinks that this works in the same way, in a similar way to the placeholder attribute of the input field, which means that into the input field, as soon as the user starts typing something, the placeholder disappears, and in place of that one, we have the actual value from the user. The same is happening here. We have the placeholder, and this will be overwritten when the science content template will be displayed here into the defer block. There are some cases though that, again, to improve the user experience, we want the placeholder to be there for a minimum amount of time. And we have this kind of mechanism just to avoid and prevent flickering. A very nice feature with the defer block is that what we're deferring the loading of the component. So since we're deferring the loading of the component, perhaps we need also to have here a loading indicator as well. So things like that is amazing if you compare how we used to have this kind of code before the defer block. We had to manually lazy load the component and display somehow also a loading indicator. So the loading works in a way that as soon as we are waiting to load a heavy component, at that time we are displaying this kind of loading. But how about if we want to have more control to that? Perhaps I want to display the loading indicator after 100 milliseconds, and I want the loading indicator to be there for 1 second. And how about if something goes wrong? In this case, we have the error block where we can display whatever we want. So far we have seen how the when works, and then we discussed about the placeholder, the loading, and the error. The when applies an imperative Boolean expression. Other than that, we have also more control on how to defer and display our component. And this is the on. The on keyword is a declarative trigger to select under which action to fetch and display our component. The idle, which is the default one, as soon as we do not have any heavy lifting action happening into the browser, at that point of time we will fetch and display that component. And please note that here I do not have the placeholder, the loading, and the error, but of course you can use that as well. Other than the idle, we also have the immediate action or trigger, and these will fetch and display immediately on the template execution. We also have the on interaction. So what is this guy doing is that as soon as we have an interaction with, let's say, this block, at that point of time, we will fetch and display the cyan component. But to be more precise, when we're saying this block, I mean, what is this block going to display to the user? At the very first time, since we have the placeholder here, it will display just the placeholder. So as soon as the user interacts with the placeholder, we will display that component. And this is why we're calling that an implicit interaction. But of course, we can have an explicit interaction. The explicit interaction is that on interaction of this guy. So as soon as we have an interaction with this trigger, we will then fetch and display this component. And please note that here into this code, I do not have any click event into the button. We expect as soon as the user interacts with this button to fetch and display this component. In the same way, having the implicit and explicit we have for the hover. And again, having the hover action or the hover trigger, what we will do is that we will display this component whenever the user hovers over this placeholder, this guy here. And of course, like we said previously, this is the implicit hover, and we have then the explicit hover, which means that as soon as the user hovers over this button, then we will display this component. We also have the option of viewport. How cool is that? So if you can imagine what kind of code we have to type for making that happen, we had to have the intersection observer, we had to import lazy load a component manually and control everything from our side. So this is not the case anymore. So having this defer on viewport allows us to fetch and display this component as soon as we have an interaction with this block, actually with the placeholder block. And this is the implicit way. And again, we'll have the explicit one, which means that as soon as this button is on the viewport, then we will fetch and display this component. How about now if we want to have a case where we want to control that over a timer? And yeah, of course, we can do that as well. We will fetch and display this component after 1 second or 1000 milliseconds. And please note that currently we have seen the when and we have also seen on, but there are some cases that we can prefetch that. So we can prefetch by combining both an imperative or declarative way. So let's go to the VS Code and see that in action. So like we said previously, this is our main component and this is the size of that. So let's try to decrease that a bit. What I'm going to do is to go into the main component and here into the app Angular survey, I will just have here a defer block and let's see what will happen. So if I have here my defer block and move this up, I'm saving, and as you can see now the main component is 1.46. Without any effort we managed to create a different chunk for Angular survey component, and now this is the size, 14.23. Nice, and of course if we go to the browser we expect everything to work as expected. So let's now do the following. I will go to the network tab and I reload, and here we have some JS files and here we have some chunks. So let's go to VS Code and grab this chunk which is the main component. So I will copy this guy and I will go to my network panel, I will filter for this, and now here if I search for survey, or you know what, we can see it here. This is the code that Angular during the compile time generated for us. So we have this chunk which will be downloaded for us whenever we invoke this function. This is amazing. So let's now try to add more control over when to display this Angular survey. So I will come here and be like, I want to defer that on, let's say, timer, and let's go with 3000 milliseconds. And if I go here, we expect not to see anything. And after 3 seconds, we have this guy. So let's do that once more. I will reload, I will clear everything, and we expect after 3 seconds, and here it is. We have it there. Nice. And of course, here we can have any other interaction we wish. For example, we can be like, let's go and do this thing. I'm going to have a placeholder and just with a span here, and the span will be like, interact with me. And I will have here the interaction. And I will expect to have an implicit interaction. Oops, I have a typo. So let's see. Now, if I go there, we do not see anything. And as soon as I interact with this guy, meaning that I have to click, the placeholder disappears and the Angular survey appears in place of our placeholder. And the same goes with the hover. So if I have here hover, and again, I will change just the title here, hover with me. I will go to the browser, and as you can see, if I hover over here, we immediately fetch that and download this. Nice. So let's now say the following. Let's say that we have a very slow connection or we have a very heavy component, and we have a certain case where we know that the user will definitely interact with this component. So to display that, I will have here a slow 3G and I will hover over, and we'll have to wait and wait and wait until this chunk will be downloaded and appears to the user. So it seems that it takes more time. So let me just remove the throttling. So in cases like that, it takes a lot of time and it's not a good user experience. So for this case, what we can do is to prefetch that. Like we said previously, we have the option to prefetch, and we can be like, I want to prefetch on idle. So what is happening now is that as soon as the page is idle, we expect to prefetch this chunk. And let's go You know what, instead of slow 3G, I will go with a fast 3G because slow is very slow. And I will reload the page, and we expect here now, after a while, to see this kind of chunk. And here is our chunk. So we are downloading that, and as you can see, this increases, which means that now when the user hovers over this guy, it will display the content without waiting further. And we can prefetch, like we said, either by using the imperative or declarative. We can even have here when, let's say, true. Of course, this will prefetch that immediately, but we can even have here something like a button. And let's say that I have my button here and I will have a click event, and this will toggle just a flag. The flag will be is visible equals not is visible. And of course, we need to have this flag here. So is visible equals false. And now we can replace the when true with when is visible. And we can prefetch that in that condition. So let's give it a try. I will have no throttling here. I will clear everything. Let's reload. And as you can see now, if I hover over, we will fetch that. But instead of hovering over, I will prefer just to click this guy. We are prefetching that. And please note that we are not displaying that to the user, but we will display that as soon as we hover. This makes sure to prefetch, and this makes sure to display that. Actually, it checks, do I have the Angular survey there? Yes, I do have the Angular survey there, so I do not have to fetch that again. This guy was responsible to fetch that for me. Nice. So let's now see the case with the loading. I want to have here just a loading, and this will be loading. I will remove the prefetch, and let's have just on hover there. And if I go here and hover over, what we could see is that for some milliseconds we saw the loading indicator. Let's do that again. Hover over, we are seeing the loading indicator, and after a while we'll have the survey component there. Now let's do the same thing, but again we will play around with throttling. I will have fast 3G and I will hover over, and now we can see that we have the loading, which makes sense to have the loading there because it takes much time to fetch the component. But let me ask you the following. How about if we have a case where the user has fast connection and the component is not heavy? What we can see is that we are hovering over and we have this flickering action which is not that good. So in this case, we can play around with this kind of conditions. I want to load that after 100 milliseconds, and I want the loading to be there for a minimum of, let's say, 1 second. So let's go there and see that again in action. If I hover over, we do not see the loading indicator anymore. And how about now if we have any error? So in case we have any error, we can display just a message, something went wrong. And please note that what we are doing with a defer block is that we are defer the loading. That's why we have here the loading block to display a message, and in the same case, the error will happen when we have a loading error. So I will reload again. I do not hover yet, but here I will go completely offline. And if I hover over, now we're seeing the message something went wrong, and we can even see here into the chunk that we have a failed status. So let's now try to improve our Angular survey a bit more. I will remove the placeholder, the loading, and the error. I will remove everything. And now what I'm going to do is that I want the Angular survey component to decrease that a bit. How can we do that? I will go into the Angular survey, and here what we can see is that we have an if condition. If the Angular version is 17, only in this case we are displaying the Angular 17 features. How about now if we have a defer block here, and instead of having the if condition, we could be like the when condition. Nice. So what we have here is that the Angular survey component is a new chunk, and the Angular 17 features component is just 18K. And now if I go and select Angular 17 here, we have this kind of feature and we have this kind of chunk. Nice. So let's try to break this a bit. I will try to break the lazy loading. As you can see here, we have the defer block and we have the Angular survey. Or you know what? I will do that once more. I will have here defer. And let's say I want this to be like on timer after 1000 milliseconds. And I will do the same here. I want to defer that after, let's say, 3 seconds. We could even do this thing. It's the same thing. So we expect after 1 second to display this and after 3 seconds to display the same thing. Nice. So let's go to the browser and I will clear everything. I will reload my page. And now after 3 seconds, as you can see, we have the Angular survey here, but we do not have any HTTP request into the network panel. And the reason is that we have already fetched this component. If something is already fetched, we do not refetch that again. So having seen that, let's now try to do the following. I will go into the Angular survey and I want to create one more just dummy component inside there. So I have this component and let's see what is happening. So we have the Angular survey component and I placed the dummy component into the same file. And what I want to show you is the following. So the Angular survey component is this chunk. So I will copy this guy and I will go to the browser and I want to search for this chunk. And this is it. While being here, I will search for dummy. And as you can see, our component is there. We lazy loaded the file that we had the Angular survey component. And in that file, we have also this kind of dummy component. What this means is that if I now do this thing, I will go to main component and I want here to have just the dummy component. And this is the selector app dummy. And inside here, I will have just this thing, just the selector. As you can see now, even during the compilation, we do not have any chunk for the Angular survey component, which is this guy. And why is that? Because this component, the Angular survey, is into the same file with the dummy component. And of course, if we go to the browser, we can see that it seems that everything works fine, and actually everything indeed works fine, but this is an eager load and it's not a lazy load. So if I remove the app dummy from there, now we expect to have our chunks back. I will delete the dummy component from here as well. And yeah, now we indeed have our chunks back and everything seems to work just fine. And that's all what I wanted to share with you about the defer block. More videos about the defer block will come, and most probably one of the next videos will be how to unit test the defer block. Please stay tuned for this one. Please let me know what you think for the defer block, if you like it or not, and if you want to see something specifically about the defer block and I didn't cover that into this video, please comment below and I will do my best to have a video explaining this case for you. And as always, do not forget to click the subscribe button and the ring bell. See you in the next video.